United Nations experts believe Israel's military assault against Palestinians in Jenin in the occupied West Bank may be a war crime. But what's behind this assessment? And will anyone face international justice? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. In one of the fiercest assaults in 2 decades on the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces in just 2 days brought death and widespread destruction to Jenin. At least 12 Palestinians were killed and thousands more displaced from the Jenin refugee camp. The tactics included airstrikes and Israeli snipers shooting from Palestinians' homes. Civilians bore the brunt of the attacks, with hospitals and vital facilities among the targets. Thousands of people, already refugees, have been left homeless, once again forced to flee. UN human rights experts say on first examination, the assault on Jenin may constitute a war crime. We'll be discussing shortly with our guests the legal implications of this and if anyone might ever face justice. But first, this update from Nida Ibrahim in Jenin.
People here tell us that if they try to escape one horror of the 2-day Israeli assault on the refugee camp, then they're faced with another. The infrastructure has been totally destroyed by the Israeli forces. Not only the roads, but you're talking about electricity and water, leading people to rely on bottled water, or some of them were carrying water in the buckets and bringing them home. The officials in the camp are trying to put some sort of an emergency plan to give them a little bit of electricity. But we're also talking about people whose homes have been totally destroyed and demolished. Others have been homeless because they cannot come back and live in their homes, so they're relying on the help of others, of strangers to stay. Basically, we're talking about a refugee camp, people who have been displaced already from their homes. We've met people who told us that, our whole life has been about displacement with refugees. Some of them said, you know what, we're not leaving and we want to die here in our camp. So you hear a lot of difficult stories by Palestinians. Some of them are relying on handouts, on aid, because you're talking about an impoverished community that cannot afford. Already, in some of them, we're already using and relying on the help of aid. If you talk about hospitals as well, those have been attacked by Israeli forces, by bullets, by tear gas, as well as airstrikes near hospitals. So wherever you go here in the camps, people have very difficult stories to share, and they want the world to know that the Israeli assault has traumatized them and their children. For Inside Story, Nida Ibrahim, Jenin, the occupied West Bank.
International law uses 3 criteria to define a war crime. That includes launching an attack in an area that can cause widespread damage, injury, or destruction, attacks on hospitals or clinics that are not military targets, and depriving civilians of what's considered objects indispensable to their survival as a method of warfare. All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. In Ramallah, Nour, Odeh, political analyst and former spokeswoman for the Palestinian Task Force on Public Diplomacy. In the Italian city of Catania, Francesca Albanese, Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian Territory occupied since 1967. And in Melbourne, Geoffrey Robertson, founding head of Doughty Street Chambers and a former UN war crimes judge. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us on Inside Story today. Nour, let me start with you today. The Jenin refugee camp has been the target of recurring and intensifying attacks by Israeli forces over the past couple of years. What's different about this latest assault?
I think what's fundamentally different about this assault is that it brought back memories of the 2002 invasion. It was the number of Israeli soldiers that were involved was much larger, the number of armored vehicles, the incursion deep into the camp revisited the trauma that the residents there had lived through about 20 years ago, when about nearly 60 Palestinians were killed during that incursion and hundreds of homes were leveled to the ground. And this was preceded by Israeli promises of increased violence, of exacting a price on the Jenin refugee camp, of taking revenge, if you will, on that camp that is blamed for so many things. So to see Palestinian refugees leave in the dead of night with nothing but the clothes on their back because they had no other alternative was collectively traumatic for Palestinians, not just for the residents of that camp. It brought back, the stories of the first refugees of 1948, and that's why this incursion, I think, is a turning point in many ways in the already very inflamed situation on the ground.
Francesca, you and other UN experts issued a statement saying that Israel's latest military operation against Palestinians in Jenin may constitute a war crime. Why was this assessment made so swiftly after the assault?
Yes, we reached this assessment looking at both the context and the specifics of this operation. Looking at the motive, although the intention is not necessarily relevant as one can understand from the definition of war crime that you gracefully quoted at the beginning of this discussion. But Israel claims that it was targeting terrorists and cells and individuals. So this needs to be unpacked, because while Israel has the right to ensure the security of its citizens from any threat, including those arising from terrorism, anyone who intentionally targets civilians through violence or intimidation and in the pursuit of a political or ideological goal should be held accountable, Palestinians and Israelis alike. And so two precisions to be made here. One is that Israel confuses its security with the security of its annexation plan, which has meant over 56 years displacement and residency revocations, home demolitions, house evictions. And what has happened in the recent months and what I have observed under my one-year tenure as a special rapporteur confirms that the context matters. Under international law, people who take up arms are not automatically considered terrorists. Think of Ukraine, where the Ukrainian people are resisting an illegal occupation, an illegal aggression, an illegal war launched by Russia on the ground of self-determination. So resistance against oppressive regimes, including colonial or oppressive regimes, is recognized as an aspect of the right of self-determination. So this doesn't exclude that the Palestinians might commit crimes. It doesn't condone the violence that they might use. They should be held accountable for that. But the alleged illegality of these acts should not be confused with the illegitimacy of the situation toward which these acts are directed. And the second element, and this is something we considered, and the second elements are the modality. An aerial bombardment with ground bombardment that has resulted into damage to 80% of the homes, of the housing units, damage to civilian infrastructure, targeting of hospitals, sewage, and essential basic civilian services, with hampering access to the wounded. These do constitute war crimes. So this is why we said, prima facie, there is no proportionality, no distinction in this large-scale use of lethal force for what would otherwise been a law enforcement operation.
Geoffrey, from your vantage point, is there enough evidence now from this latest operation in Jenin to warrant an investigation into potential war crimes? And do you think that there will be one?
No, there will not. And that's because of the attitude of the Israeli government, which has blocked all independent investigations. They will do it themselves. There was, back 10 years ago or so, Operation Cast Lead, where 1,000 civilians were killed, but 400 investigations were opened by the Israeli army. And at the end of the day, only one person was sentenced to prison, and that was for stealing a credit card, nothing to do with the operation. So it's not acceptable that one of the participants will do the investigation. Hamas didn't do any investigations, despite allegations of war crimes on the other side. So the problem is not, the first problem is to ascertain what happened. And by an independent investigation, and that we will not get because Israel blocks independent investigation. But if it's a war crime, there are defenses, and they have to be seriously considered. A refugee camp, in principle, is a place which should be protected, because war law basically protects civilians from the worst consequences of war. But the Israeli army insists that there were weapons, that there were bombs, that there were all sorts of offensive things. Well, did they find any? They killed 12 Palestinians. Oh, they say all the people killed were terrorists, but they wounded quite a few people, and they said, well, not all the people who were wounded were terrorists. So this is pretty unsatisfactory. It's not, it's something that has to be investigated. Were the people killed simply refugees with no reference at all to taking up arms against Israel? So I think that the answer in reality is, what was the purpose of this attack, which did take lives and destroy 18,000 people had to flee. Their homes were destroyed. What was the purpose? And of course, there is no overwhelming purpose. Israel will have to do the same in, I imagine, 3 months' time. It's this terrible sense that it was expressed in a poem by an English poet called Odeh. He said, I and the public know what all school children learn. Those to whom evil is done do evil in return. And that seems to me to sum up a situation where there is no law. And that is a situation which can only be changed by international agreement, by an international conference. It seems the two-state solution is out of the window. We have to find another solution. And that is very difficult at a time when the most barbaric war crimes, of course, are being committed by Putin and his army in Ukraine.
Nour, Geoffrey is saying that there should be an investigation, but that there won't be an investigation. There won't be an independent investigation. I want to get your thoughts on this. The Palestinian Authority is urging the International Criminal Court to start holding Israeli war crimes accountable. Is that something that you foresee happening?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to predict, and I don't want to sound like I'm lashing out at the ICC, but I think it's worth noting that since this prosecutor headed the ICC, he's been mute on Palestine, and he's downgraded an investigation that is supposed to be open into possible war crimes in Palestine, basically to oblivion. He does not talk about Palestine. He does not comment on clear and grave violations of international law happening in Palestine. He even downgraded the amount of budget allocated to the investigation that his office has supposedly opened some time ago into the situation in Palestine. I think, as much as we talk about the independence of the court, and as much as we talk about independent commissions of inquiry, and there have been many into attacks by Israel on Palestinians, it boils down to political will and the fact that there are states who provide the budgets for the ICC and for other international bodies, who basically hijack the process and who, by indirectly or directly, extort these bodies into providing cover for Israel and providing it with immunity and continuing to pamper it and protect it from any form of accountability. We've seen that happen time and time again. We've seen countries write to the ICC against the idea of accountability, even though they pushed that same court to open an investigation into war crimes possibly committed in Ukraine when neither Ukraine nor Russia were members of the court. So the duplicity that is applied, the exceptionalism that countries like the United States and others insist on when it comes to Israel is really quite, jaw-dropping, and it's very consistent. We see it year in and year out, not just at the ICC, but at every international fora where accountability is a possibility.
Francesca, I want to get your response to this, too, because you heard Nour there talk about the fact that it was, I believe, in 2021 when the ICC opened a formal investigation looking at whether alleged war crimes had been committed by either Israeli forces or by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups. In the last couple of days, we've seen a statement from the office of the head prosecutor of the ICC saying that he's continuously monitoring the Palestinian situation. I'm curious, why is this all taking so long?
I cannot speak with certainty. This is an answer that should be given by the office of the prosecutor. Whatever the reason, it's unacceptable. It really taints the credibility of the court and international criminal justice and international justice with it, because it continues to perpetuate the image of international law with all its instruments at the service of a minority, technically of the West. And the only way also to dispel this belief is to use all possible avenues without exceptionalism and without double standards. So far, the International Criminal Court has not been such. But there are two elements I would like to bring to the discussion. One is that universal jurisdiction can also be pursued through national courts. And this is an avenue that has been explored. It has failed, but it should not be forgotten. I do believe that this is still an opportunity to pursue justice. But also restoration of the second element is that restoring international law doesn't limit itself to international justice. There is third state responsibility under international law. Israel, the illegality of the occupation is manifest. The annexation plan, which is absolutely prohibited under international law, is manifest. Settler colonial practices are ongoing. The apartheid regime is fully documented. This is enough to take decisive actions from an international community point of view, from UN member states. If there is a paralysis at the UN Security Council, individual states or group of states should act on their own accord to recur to the economic, political, and diplomatic measures, countermeasures afforded by the UN Charter to bring this situation to an end.
Francesca, let me also ask you, I mean, if what we're witnessing right now is the fact that universal jurisdiction is not being applied, or there is no other really sufficient mechanism by which to try to bring accountability, what's stopping Israel from essentially doing anything at once? I mean, even if they are being told that they are breaking international law.
I believe it's political pressure, and there is a general. I think that this is part and parcel of the general. Nour called it immunity. I think it's impunity. The general impunity that is granted to Israel, which is not an exception, in a sense that there are many states in this world, unfortunately, which commits abhorrent crimes and atrocity crimes and international law violations.
Geoffrey, let me get your vantage point. When it comes to international law, when it comes to international justice, will there be more international pressure put on Israel? Will they feel like they can act with impunity?
Well, a lot of countries can. The country that is acting with the greatest impunity and doing the most damage at the moment is Russia, which has torn up the UN Charter and has invaded another country and is causing war crimes, hundreds every day, by bombing civilians, by all the things that we can see on television. So it is acting with impunity. And not only that, it's got nuclear weapons which terrifies everyone. So we are in a very difficult stage at the moment. International justice has only come on in the last 20 or so years. The courts are still building up their precedents and building up their powers. And at the moment, they can't touch Russia because it is a member of the Security Council and ridiculously can veto any action taken against it, even though it's mass murdering Ukrainians in a country which it invaded. So this is not to say that the Palestinian victims are any lesser than the Ukrainian victims. It's just that Russia, as a member of the Security Council, has defied the international world order and so is in a different situation to Israel, which, as I say, has some restraint. There was a very important development a week ago. It was on the 24th of June, which was the day that Russia seemed to come apart by Prigozhin's revolt. But the commander of the Israeli army and the head of Shin Bet and a couple of other senior officials attacked the settler movement, the right-wing group that seems to have overtaken Israel. And it may well be you've got a country which has never had such a violent racist government, where many members of Mr. Netanyahu's government call for the extermination of Palestinians. And this is the state of a country which is trying to shackle appointments to its Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court of Israel was one of the, over the years, has been one check and balance in the Israeli constitution. So I think it's going to get worse, and the prospects of keeping Israel and other countries in the world within the restrictions of war law. Let's face it, war law we've had for hundreds of years, and you don't kill your prisoners, you don't destroy civilian houses, you don't bomb where children and innocent civilians are going to be killed.
Jeffrey, I'm sorry. Jeffrey, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're just starting to run out of time. Nour, I want to ask you about one of the reasons why we're seeing all this happen right now. Is the biggest reason we're seeing what's going on when it comes to Jenin happening right now, is it because the current government is the most right-wing government in Israel's history?
Well, I think that's definitely part of it, because the ideology that drives this government is one that seeks elimination and the decimation of Palestinians. They make no secret of that. If we can give them credit, we can give them credit for being honest and forward about what they plan to do in the occupied territory and to the Palestinian people. But I think, just picking up on what the judge was talking about, I think the fact that Israel has enjoyed impunity for so long and enjoyed this protection from other countries for so long, from any accountability, has encouraged other countries to just say, well, you know what, these laws and these practices, we can upend them and we can violate the laws of war because we can, because we have the power to, because we have a veto. Israel doesn't sit in the Security Council, but it has a very good representative. The U.S. has used the veto power to protect Israel more times at the Security Council than on any other subject. So Israel knows it can literally get away with murder. There have been several reports documenting its previous war crimes and grave violations. No accountability, zero, not just in terms of criminal accountability, but countries, instead of applying sanctions, instead of saying, we are not going to deal with you as a normal law-abiding state until you actually abide by the law, are showering Israel with political gifts, with more financial agreements, with even military cooperation when this military stands accused of committing more crimes. And I think that's the third-party responsibility dimension of accountability that we need to focus on. And the international public opinion is prepared for that. People around the world are overwhelmingly fed up, really, with that double standard and with Israel getting away with all these violations, because people understand that if you allow a bully to get away with bullying in one neighborhood, then all the bullies in all the other neighborhoods will be encouraged.
Francesca, we just have about a minute and a half left, but let me just ask you, what are the types of tactics and weaponry used by Israel in this latest assault on Jenin that most concerned you and your colleagues?
The aerial bombardment and the ground bombardment and the ground attacks are both of concerns. I mean, I'm not a military expert. I look at the consequences and I have a people-centered approach. So I look at what happens on the receiving ends. As it was said before by others, the displacement of 4,000 people, the destruction of homes, the destruction of civilian infrastructures, whatever the means which caused it, the use of those means has resulted in a situation which is prima facie unlawful. And again, it should be placed in a context. I mean, it shouldn't be read disjunctively from the daily structural violence that permeates the lives of the Palestinians under occupation after 56 years and within 100 years of dispossession.
All right. Well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Nour Odeh, Francesca Albanese, and Geoffrey Robertson. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.